now let's talk about one that is, and that
This
is
is the big
taxes. All right. So, tax changes. This makes permanent the reduced income tax rates from the 2017 Trump tax cuts, all of them. It makes permanent and expands the estate and gift tax cuts to $15 million per person. That means that, Amy, if I had it, I could gift you $15 million
Thank you so much.
without you having to pay any taxes.
I love that. I'm gonna go on a cruise.
Now, anything above that 15 million, you would have to pay 40% on, but you got 15.
Goodness
It also
gracious.
makes permanent the expanded qualified business income tax deductions, which are going to be things like S corps and sole proprietorships and partnerships. Basically, pass through businesses, and um, the House bill actually boosts that deduction. The Senate bill doesn't. And it temporarily raises the tax deduction for seniors that are 65 plus. In the House, it raises it by 4,000. Senate raises it by 6,000. Now, if you know most 65 plus year olds, they're not making that much money. And in fact, most seniors, about 60%, won't benefit at all from this because they don't pay federal income taxes. Ones that will benefit, of course, are senators who are 65 plus and House members who are 65 plus.
So like all of them?
Uh, yeah, a lot. Now we're going to talk about the expanded child tax credit. The expanded child tax credit is going to go up in the House bill from $2,000 a year to $2,500 a year through 2028, which is a great thing for a lot of people. However, about 20 million children that have working class families would get less than the full $2,500 credit. It's a pretty complicated formula. Basically, after you make 2,500, you get $15 for every 100. But basically, what this means is that a single parent of two young children making $16,000 a year would get around $1,125 per child, whereas a married couple with two kids and a combined income of $300,000 a year would get the full $2,500 per child. In the Senate bill, the child tax credit is similar. However, it's a little bit less. It's $2,200 a child. All right, temporary tax changes for tips and overtime. I'm not going to talk about the Senate version. There's a couple little things that are different, but it's pretty much the same. No tax on tips. This is one of Trump's big proposals for people earning under $160,000. It's not super controversial. In fact, a similar bill passed the Senate with unanimous consent earlier this year. It costs the government about $4 billion a year. However, the only concern is that about 37% of tipped workers don't owe federal income taxes. The next one we're going to talk about is no tax on overtime. Again, they're pretty much the same in the House and the Senate. It's also for people earning under $160,000. It costs the government about $16 billion a year, a little bit more than the tips one. And the main concern is that vague rules could be exploited by high income earners. So, for example, a business owner could legally employ their college-age child, pay them $25,000 in overtime for summer work, and the child could deduct the full amount. Again, this one's temporary, so it would also expire in 2028.
But that provision alone adds $20 billion to the deficit.
Yeah, almost. All right, let's do tax changes by the numbers. Now, we only have these numbers for the House bill. We don't have them for the Senate bill, and the reason why should be pretty obvious. The reason why is because the Senate hasn't gotten through it yet, and they don't have these numbers yet. But they're probably going to be pretty close. If you make $5 million a year, you're in luck. You get about $300,000 back. If you make $1 million a year, you get about $1,000 in tax cuts. If you make $50,000, you get about 815, and if you make $20,000 a year, you get about 160. This one I think is probably the most important slide about tax changes because it really kind of highlights who gets what. And when you put it together with the other slides that we've done, it really shows what's going on. The impact of the tax changes is it increased the deficits by up to $3.8 trillion over the next 10 years. It stimulates the economy by about 0.4%, which is around the equivalent of a $150 billion to $200 billion infrastructure bill. But it cost $3.8 trillion instead of $200 billion. And the economic growth from the cuts would account for approximately 6% of the cost. In May, Moody's lowered the US credit rating due to concerns about the government's ability to manage its debt. And this is another thing because it impacts everyone. If we have higher debt, we're going to have higher interest rates. The reason why is because the way that you finance your debt is you have people buy bonds. Okay. If you have to sell more bonds, you're going to have to raise interest rates because that's the only way that those people are going to buy those bonds. And the more bonds you have, the more you have to incentivize, the higher those interest rates have to be. But those interest rates are not just going to be high for the bondholders. They're also going to be high for everyone else. So if you have a credit card that you have to pay interest on, that interest is going to be higher. Mortgage rates are going to go up. Car loans are going to go up. So it's going to impact everyone. In fact, it's estimated that over the next 10 years, nearly 1 in every $5 will go to bondholders as interest instead of services or tax relief. So there's been a lot of discussion on if these tax cuts could actually stimulate the economy so much that they pay for themselves. Is that true? Well, if a tax cut for a certain person can pay for itself, actually has a lot more to do with which person is getting the tax cut. So let's talk about it. Remember how we talked a lot about multiplier effects? We're still going with the multiplier effects. So let's talk about a family of 4. This is a low-income household. They're making under $50,000 a year. They do have a multiplier effect. Guess what? That means that that tax cut is going to pay for itself. In fact, the multiplier effect is $1.10 to $1.50 for every dollar in tax cuts. And the reason why is because they're going to spend their tax savings for their immediate needs. Okay, it's going to go directly back into the economy, and then it's going to fund more jobs so that more people have work, more people have more money, just like the other multiplier effects we talked about. Now let's talk about middle incomes. Middle income households for a family of 4 would be between 50 and 150,000. The multiplier effect is between 80 cents and $1.20 for every dollar in tax cuts. The reason why is because they spend a lot of it immediately, but some may save. So would these pay for themselves? Yeah, but not as much as for the lower income households. Now let's talk about high income households. These are considered to be over $150,000 a year. These don't. For every dollar in tax cuts, the economy would get between 20 and 40 cents. The reason why is because for these households, most of the money is going to be saved or invested. It's not going to be spent in the economy. So because so much of these tax cuts go to people who make over $150,000 a year, the answer is no. When these people get these tax cuts, it's not going to go back into the economy. In fact, it's going to do the opposite.
So, in just to break it down, that means that people that have less money are using every penny that they have because they have to. And the people that make astronomical amounts of money, at least comparatively, they don't have the need to spend every penny that they have. They have enough to save and put aside.
Exactly.